My family spent my entire life mocking me and constantly comparing me to my sister, but now that I'm engaged to someone wealthy, they're suddenly desperate for an invitation to my wedding. I was actually considering it, until my aunt revealed something that changed everything. Growing up, I was like a background character in the grand production of Emma's life. She was the golden girl, the kind of person who turned heads the moment she walked into a room. Tall, with perfectly styled hair and an effortless charm, she was every parent's dream child. Emma was a straight-A student, an athlete, and the kind of person who could make even her mistakes look graceful. My parents worshipped her. I, on the other hand, was a different story. I struggled in school, tripped over my own feet, and carried more weight than I wanted to. My parents never let me forget it. It wasn't just the subtle comparisons that stung, it was the outright mockery. My dad once told me, in front of half the family at a barbecue, that if I didn't inherit the looks or the brains, I'd better at least try to develop a sense of humor. Everyone laughed, including my mom. Emma just smiled, her usual indifferent smile, as if my humiliation was a small price to pay for her pedestal. But it wasn't just limited to home. Family gatherings were the worst. My mom would zero in on me as soon as I walked in the door, immediately critiquing whatever I was wearing. "Oh, that's a bold choice," she'd say, her voice dripping with sarcasm, while Emma floated in wearing something effortlessly chic. My dad would always find a way to remind me of my shortcomings, too. I still remember the Thanksgiving dinner when he pointed at Emma's salad and then at my mashed potatoes and said, loud enough for the whole table to hear, "Maybe you should take some notes if you ever want to catch up to your sister." The cruelty didn't stop there. My parents weren't just indifferent to my feelings, they actively undermined me. When I managed to win a small art competition in high school, something I was genuinely proud of, they barely acknowledged it. My mom laughed and said, "Well, at least you're good at something," before quickly pivoting the conversation to Emma's latest achievements. Emma didn't bother defending me. If anything, she enjoyed being the star of the show. For years, I tried to please them. I worked harder in school, hoping to bring home grades that would make them proud. I joined clubs, thinking that maybe if I became more well-rounded, they'd see me differently. None of it worked. They always found a way to compare me to Emma. If I brought home a B+, my mom would remind me that Emma never scored less than an A. If I started a fitness routine, my dad would ask, "Why bother? You're never going to have Emma's figure." By the time I hit 18, I realized I couldn't take it anymore. I'd been saving up money from part-time jobs, and one night, I just packed a bag and left. I didn't leave a note. I didn't tell them where I was going. Honestly, I didn't even care if they noticed. When I walked out that door, I felt more relief than fear. I didn't have much, a small savings account, some clothes, and a sense of desperation to escape. But it was enough. My parents didn't come looking for me. They didn't call, didn't text. It was as if my absence confirmed what I had always suspected. I didn't matter to them. Over the next few months, I tried to rebuild myself from scratch. I got a tiny apartment, took on 2 jobs, and enrolled in community college. It was exhausting, but it was my choice, and that made all the difference. For the first time, I was free from the constant comparisons, the sarcastic comments, and the weight of trying to live up to someone else's ideal. I was finally living for myself. But even as I moved forward, the scars from my childhood stayed with me. Every time I looked in the mirror, I heard my mom's voice criticizing my appearance. Every time I failed a test or made a mistake, I imagined my dad shaking his head in disappointment. It took years to unlearn the belief that I was inherently less than Emma. The only person who kept in touch with me was my Aunt Jane. She was my mom's younger sister, and unlike the rest of my family, she saw me for who I was. Jane was the one person who never laughed at my parents' cruel jokes or compared me to Emma. She encouraged me, told me I was smart and capable, and always made me feel like I mattered. Without her, I don't think I would have survived those first few years on my own. Meanwhile, Emma's life continued to be the center of the family universe. Through Jane, I learned about her latest accomplishments, graduating at the top of her class, getting a high-paying job, and dating a series of successful men. My parents couldn't stop bragging about her, even to people who didn't care. Jane told me how, during a family reunion, my dad spent the entire time showing off pictures of Emma's new boyfriend, a surgeon, while dismissing my existence entirely. "How's your other daughter doing?" someone asked. "Oh, you know," my dad replied, waving his hand dismissively. "She's doing her thing." It hurt, but I was determined not to let their opinions define me anymore. I focused on my studies, discovered a passion for software engineering, and eventually landed a good job at a tech firm. For the first time in my life, I started to feel like I was enough, not for them, but for myself. Still, a part of me couldn't help but wonder if they ever missed me. Did they regret the way they treated me? Or was I just the family afterthought, the invisible daughter they only remembered when someone asked an inconvenient question? Little did I know, the answer would come years later, in the most unexpected way. Moving out of my parents' house wasn't just an act of rebellion, it was survival. Every cruel comment, every cutting remark, and every public humiliation had slowly chipped away at me until I felt like a shadow of a person. Leaving was my way of reclaiming whatever fragments of myself I had left. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I also knew staying wasn't an option. I found a tiny apartment on the edge of town, one of those places with paper-thin walls and a perpetually leaky faucet. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I juggled 2 jobs, waiting tables during the day and stocking shelves at a grocery store at night. The hours were brutal, and I was constantly exhausted, but the grind gave me a sense of purpose. For the first time in my life, I was working towards something for myself, not for the approval of people who would never give it. I enrolled in night classes at the local community college, taking a random mix of courses until I stumbled onto an intro to programming class. I hadn't expected much, but something about coding clicked for me. It felt like solving a puzzle, and with every problem I solved, I felt a little spark of confidence reignite. For the first time, I was good at something measurable, something that didn't rely on looks or charm or any of the qualities I'd been told I lacked. I poured myself into it, staying up late to practice, reading books I could barely afford, and teaching myself everything I could about software engineering. The hard work paid off. By the time I transferred to a university, I had a solid portfolio and had already landed a summer internship at a tech company. From there, everything started to fall into place. After graduation, I landed a full-time role at a mid-sized firm. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Over the years, my relationship with my family dwindled to almost nothing. My mom would occasionally send me texts, but they were always about Emma. Emma's getting her PhD. Emma's dating a surgeon. She once sent me a photo of Emma's new house with the caption, "Look what hard work can get you." As if I wasn't working hard myself. I never replied to any of it. My dad didn't bother with pretense. The only time he ever contacted me was to remind me how proud they were of Emma, as if her accomplishments somehow negated my existence. The only family member I stayed in touch with was Aunt Jane. Jane was my lifeline, the one person who never joined in the ridicule or comparisons. She would call me every couple of weeks just to check in, and she never failed to remind me how proud she was of my progress. Jane never asked me about my parents or Emma. She focused on me, my life, my struggles, my victories, and for that, I loved her more than I could put into words. When I met Noah, I wasn't looking for love. At the time, I was content with my work, my little apartment, and my quiet life. Noah was the CEO of the company I worked for, and while he was always kind and approachable, I never imagined he'd be interested in me. He was charming, confident, and undeniably successful, everything I wasn't. When he started showing up at my desk with questions about my projects, I thought it was just professional interest. But then he asked me to lunch, and then dinner. And before I knew it, we were spending all our free time together. Noah wasn't just kind. He was genuine. He never looked at me like I was a project to fix or a mess to clean up. He saw me as I was and liked me for it. For the first time in my life, someone treated me like I was enough. Our relationship progressed quickly. Noah wasn't one for games, and he made it clear early on that he wanted something serious. 2 years later, he proposed during a quiet evening at home. It was simple, heartfelt, and perfect. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was finally stepping into the light, free from the shadow of my past. The news of our engagement spread quickly, thanks to Aunt Jane, who was over the moon and couldn't resist telling a few close friends. Somehow, the news made its way back to my parents. Within days, my mom was calling me, her voice dripping with uncharacteristic enthusiasm. "Oh, sweetheart, congratulations. I heard you're engaged. Tell me all about him," she gushed, as if we'd been close all along. It didn't take long for her real motives to become clear. When I mentioned that Noah was the CEO of the company I worked for, her interest spiked. "A CEO? Wow, Emma will be so impressed," she said, as though Emma's approval was the ultimate benchmark. My dad chimed in a few days later, asking about Noah's family, his background, and his income, as if he were conducting a business transaction. "You've really landed on your feet, huh?" he said, almost sounding surprised. Emma, of course, got involved too. She texted me, congratulating me in a way that felt more like an obligation than genuine happiness. "Let me know if you need help planning the wedding," she wrote, followed by a series of suggestions that were more about showcasing her own taste than helping me. She even included photos of venues she'd been considering for her own future wedding, as if I'd be lucky to have her hand me down ideas. Part of me wanted to push them all away, but another part, the part that still craved their approval, hesitated. Maybe this was my chance to prove I wasn't the failure they'd always thought I was. Maybe, just maybe, I could finally earn their respect. But then Jane called me one evening, her tone serious. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Your parents aren't reaching out because they've changed. They're reaching out because they see an opportunity. Don't let them manipulate you, sweetheart. They don't deserve to be part of this." At first, I didn't want to believe her. But deep down, I knew she was right. My parents hadn't changed. They were the same people who had spent years tearing me down, and now they saw an opportunity to use me, and Noah, for their own gain.
And Emma?
She wasn't offering help out of sisterly love. She was positioning herself to outshine me, even on my own wedding day. I realized then that this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the life I was building with Noah and the boundaries I needed to set. I had worked too hard to let them drag me back into their toxic games. It was time to take control of my story, once and for all. I hadn't planned on telling my family about the engagement. In fact, the thought of it made me uneasy. The news felt sacred, something to share only with people who genuinely cared about me. But Aunt Jane, bless her heart, couldn't contain her excitement. She told a mutual cousin, who told another, and within days, it had spread back to my parents. That's when the phone calls began. The first was from my mom, her voice dripping with sugar-coated enthusiasm. "Sweetheart, congratulations," she exclaimed, as though we'd spoken regularly over the years instead of the occasional text she sent to gloat about Emma. "I'm so happy for you. I always knew you'd find someone special." I almost dropped my phone. This was the same woman who used to joke that I'd end up a lonely cat lady because guys like Emma, not girls like you. Now she was acting like she'd been my biggest cheerleader all along. Before I could respond, she launched into a barrage of questions. "What's he like? Where did you meet? What does he do?" I gave short, vague answers, trying to end the conversation, but the moment I mentioned Noah was the CEO of the company I worked for, her tone shifted. "A CEO? Oh, that's wonderful. You must bring him to dinner soon. Your father will be so impressed." The next call came from my dad. Unlike my mom's cloying sweetness, he went straight to the point. "Jane says your fiancé is some big-shot CEO. That true?" he asked, his voice tinged with curiosity and, perhaps, a hint of disbelief. When I confirmed it, he hummed approvingly. "Well, looks like you've finally landed on your feet. Tell me, what's his background? What kind of family does he come from?" The questions weren't out of genuine interest. They were calculated. My dad was sizing Noah up, figuring out how he could fit into the family's narrative of success. It didn't take long for him to segue into suggestions for the wedding. "You should invite Dr. Thompson and his wife. They're close friends of the family, and it'd be good to have people like them there." I barely knew the Thompsons, but, to my dad, they represented the kind of social connections he wanted to showcase. As if on cue, Emma called me later that day. Her message was brief and perfunctory, the bare minimum effort required to appear polite. "Congrats on the engagement," she said, her tone detached. "Let me know if you need help with the wedding planning." At first, I thought she was offering an olive branch, but then she started sending me lists of venues she'd considered for her own engagement party, complete with condescending notes like, "This might be a bit over your budget, but it's a good option." Over the next few weeks, my parents went into overdrive. My mom started texting me photos of wedding dresses Emma had modeled during a family shopping trip, along with not-so-subtle suggestions like, "This style would look great on you if you lose a few pounds." My dad emailed me spreadsheets of guest lists filled with people I barely knew, insisting they're important connections. "You'll thank me later." Against my better judgment, I started to let them in. Part of me, the part that had always craved their approval, wanted to believe this was genuine.
Maybe they'd changed.
Maybe this was their way of making amends for the years of neglect and cruelty. I even agreed to meet with Emma to discuss ideas for the engagement party. But Aunt Jane was quick to burst that bubble. She called me one night, her voice heavy with concern. "I need to tell you something," she said. "I overheard your mom and Emma talking at a family dinner. They weren't being kind, sweetheart." I held my breath as she continued. "They're planning to use the engagement party to humiliate you. Your mom was talking about digging up embarrassing stories from your childhood to tell Noah's friends. Emma said it'd be a good way to show the real dynamic of the family and remind everyone who the real star is. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt stupid for letting them back in, even for a moment. They're using you, Jane said firmly. They don't care about you or your happiness. They just see this as an opportunity to boost their image and position Emma as the perfect daughter. Don't let them. I wanted to cry, but instead, I felt a slow burn of anger. This wasn't new behavior. It was just a new stage for their old tactics. For years, they had belittled me to prop up Emma, and now they were trying to use my engagement to Noah as another opportunity to showcase her. I realized Jane was right. I couldn't let them do this. I decided then and there to draw a line. I stopped responding to my mom's texts and ignored my dad's emails. When Emma called to check on the engagement party plans, I told her I had everything under control and didn't need her help. My parents, sensing the shift, tried to guilt me into including them, but I held firm. It wasn't easy. Cutting them off felt like ripping open an old wound, but I knew I couldn't let them derail the life I had worked so hard to build. For years, they had controlled the narrative of who I was, painting me as the awkward, unworthy younger sister. But this time, I had the power to decide how my story would be told. The engagement party went on without them, and it was perfect. Surrounded by friends, colleagues, and the people who genuinely cared about us, Noah and I celebrated the beginning of our new chapter together. My parents and Emma were nowhere to be found, and for the first time, I didn't miss them. Armed with Jane's warning, I decided it was time to stop hiding behind avoidance and confront my family head-on. If they were going to manipulate and humiliate me, they wouldn't get away with it quietly. I invited my parents and Emma to lunch under the guise of discussing wedding plans. The choice of venue was strategic, a popular, bustling cafe in town. It was crowded enough that they'd have to keep their voices down, but intimate enough that I could look each of them in the eye when I said my piece. When they arrived, they were all smiles. My mom greeted me with her usual exaggerated cheerfulness. "Oh, darling, you look wonderful. Have you been working out?" she asked, her tone implying she was surprised I could look presentable. My dad gave me a nod, his default greeting when he couldn't be bothered to fake enthusiasm. Emma, as usual, was immaculate, wearing an outfit that screamed effortless sophistication. "So," she said, flashing a practiced smile, "let's hear all about this dream wedding." We ordered lunch, and I let them talk, pretending to listen as they launched into a flurry of unsolicited advice. My mom opened her phone to show me a Pinterest board she had created. "I've been collecting ideas for you," she said, flipping through photos of venues and centerpieces that looked suspiciously similar to ones Emma had picked for her engagement party. Then came the first jab. "Of course," my mom continued, "you'll want to keep it tasteful. Nothing too extravagant. A lavish wedding might make it seem like you're trying too hard." She smiled sweetly, as though her comment was thoughtful rather than condescending. Emma didn't miss her cue. She laughed and said, "Especially considering where you started." Her words hung in the air, dripping with mockery. My dad smirked, his eyes darting to me for a reaction. It was as if they had rehearsed this, each playing their role in a coordinated attack. That was the last straw. I leaned back in my chair and let out a laugh, sharp and bitter. It caught them off guard. "You know what?" I said, setting down my fork. "Let's talk about where I started. Let's talk about all the times you tore me down, compared me to Emma, and made me feel like I was nothing." I could feel the heat rising in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. My mom's face froze in a mask of faux concern. "Sweetheart, what are you talking about?" she said, her tone dripping with innocence. "We've always supported you." "Supported me?" I repeated, incredulous. "Was that support when you mocked my weight in front of everyone at family dinners? Or when you told me I'd never be as successful or beautiful as Emma? Or when Dad made jokes about how I'd need a good sense of humor to make up for everything I lacked?" The color drained from my mom's face, but she quickly recovered. "We were joking," she said, as though that made it better. "You know we never meant to hurt you." "That's the problem," I shot back. "You never cared enough to think about how your words affected me. And now you're only here because you want something from me. You don't care about my happiness or my wedding. You care about how it makes you look. And you, Emma?" I turned to her, watching her squirm for the first time. "You've spent your entire life letting them tear me down to boost you up. And you loved every second of it." Emma opened her mouth to respond, but I didn't give her the chance. I stood up, threw some cash on the table for my meal, and looked at them one last time. You don't get to ruin this for me. Stay out of my life. With that, I walked out of the cafe, my heart pounding but my head held high. I thought that would be the end of it, but of course, it wasn't. My mom turned to her favorite weapon, Facebook. That night, she posted a long, emotional rant about ungrateful children who turn their backs on their families. Some people forget where they come from, she wrote, alongside a carefully chosen photo of Emma and me as kids, smiling and holding hands. No matter what, we'll always love her. It was a masterclass in manipulation, designed to paint her as the loving, heartbroken mother and me as the cold, selfish daughter. The comments poured in. Distant relatives and family friends who didn't know the full story chimed in with their support. "You're such a wonderful mom," one person wrote. "She'll come around eventually." Another added, "Kids these days have no respect. Stay strong." Emma wasn't far behind. She posted a passive-aggressive status about the importance of family and how sad it is when people let success go to their head. She even liked a few of the more scathing comments on my mom's post. My dad didn't post anything, but I knew his silence was complicit. They were united in their campaign to make me look like the villain. At first, I was furious. I wanted to fire back, to post my own version of events and expose their lies. But then I realized that engaging would only give them more ammunition. Instead, I blocked them. My mom, my dad, Emma, their accounts were wiped from my feed. It was a small act of defiance, but it felt like reclaiming a part of my life they had no right to. That night, Aunt Jane called me. "I saw the posts," she said, her voice laced with anger. "Don't let them get to you. Anyone who knows you knows the truth." I took a deep breath. "I'm done, Jane. I'm done letting them control the narrative. They can say whatever they want. I'm not letting them ruin this for me." "Good," she said firmly. "You've worked too hard to let them drag you down again. You don't owe them anything." She was right. For years, I had lived in their shadow, letting their words shape how I saw myself. But now, I had something they couldn't take away, my own life, my own happiness, and my own voice. And I was finally ready to use it. After my family's public smear campaign, I realized there was no point in engaging with them directly. They wanted a reaction, validation that their words had power over me. Instead, I decided to act quietly but decisively. If they were going to turn my engagement into a stage for their drama, I'd make sure they never got near it. The first step was removing them from the guest list. It felt symbolic, like a final act of taking back control. At first, I agonized over the decision. Part of me worried about the fallout. What would people think? Would I come across as petty? But then I reminded myself of the years of ridicule, the cutting remarks, and the deliberate efforts to undermine me. They didn't deserve a place in this new chapter of my life. Noah, ever the pragmatist, didn't bat an eye when I told him. "It's your decision," he said, taking my hand. "I'll support whatever you feel is right." He even offered to have a security team monitor the guest list to ensure no uninvited attendees slipped through the cracks. It wasn't a suggestion I had anticipated, but I agreed. Knowing I had his support made all the difference. Of course, my parents didn't take the news well. The first sign of trouble came when a distant cousin texted me. "Your mom just called asking if I could RSVP for her since she lost the invite. What's going on?" My dad, not one for subtlety, sent a curt email demanding to know why their invitations hadn't arrived. "This is a mistake, right?" he wrote, as if he couldn't fathom the possibility that I'd exclude them. Emma, unsurprisingly, was the most vocal. She called me, her tone dripping with faux concern. "Hey, I just heard from Mom and Dad.
They're really upset about the guest list."
Did something happen with the invites?" I almost laughed at how rehearsed it sounded. When I told her I had decided to keep the event small and only include people who had supported Noah and me, her mask slipped. "That's ridiculous," she snapped. "We're your family. People will notice if we're not there. Do you really want to embarrass yourself like that?" I hung up without responding. The only family member who truly understood was Aunt Jane. She called me the next day, her voice calm but firm.
"You're doing the right thing," she said.
"They're just upset because they can't control the narrative anymore. Let them spin their wheels. You owe them nothing." Jane wasn't just my confidant during the fallout. She became my unofficial spokesperson. Relatives who reached out to her with questions were met with the unvarnished truth. Years of abuse, manipulation, and neglect. Some were shocked, others defensive, but Jane held her ground. "If you think she's wrong for standing up for herself," she told one particularly nosy aunt, "then maybe you're part of the problem." The engagement party was everything I had dreamed of and more. It was held at a beautiful rooftop venue overlooking the city, with twinkling lights and soft music setting the mood. Noah and I were surrounded by friends, colleagues, and the people who had stood by us through thick and thin. Aunt Jane was there, of course, beaming with pride as she clinked glasses with my closest friends. During the dinner, Jane stood to give a toast. I wasn't expecting her to speak, but when she raised her glass, the room fell silent. "I've known this incredible woman her entire life," she began, her voice steady but full of emotion. "And I've watched her grow from someone who doubted her worth to someone who knows exactly who she is. She's strong, resilient, and kind. And tonight, I couldn't be prouder to celebrate her and Noah, two people who truly deserve the happiness they've found." There wasn't a dry eye in the room by the time she finished. I hugged her tightly, overwhelmed by gratitude. For once, I felt seen, not as Emma Shadow, not as the awkward girl who could never measure up, but as myself. It was a moment I would carry with me forever. But the peace didn't last long. The very next morning, I woke up to a string of missed calls and frantic texts from mutual family members. My mom had taken to Facebook again, posting a scathing diatribe about how she and my dad had been deliberately excluded from the engagement party. "We've always been there for her," she wrote, conveniently leaving out the years of neglect and cruelty. "Family is supposed to stick together, but I guess that doesn't matter to some people." Emma piled on, commenting, "It's sad when people forget their roots just because they're marrying into money. Some of us value family over appearances." The post quickly gained traction, with relatives and family friends chiming in. Some expressed outrage on my behalf, but others jumped to my parents' defense, parroting phrases like, "Family is everything," and "Life's too short to hold grudges." At first, I felt a familiar pang of guilt. Even after everything they had done, part of me wondered if I had gone too far. But then I remembered Jane's words, "You owe them nothing." This wasn't about revenge. It was about protecting my happiness and setting boundaries they had spent my entire life ignoring. Noah, ever the voice of reason, helped me put things into perspective. "They're upset because you've taken away their power," he said, scrolling through the posts. "Don't give it back by engaging. Let them scream into the void. You have nothing to prove to them." As the days went on, the online drama started to fade, replaced by newer gossip and distractions. My parents and Emma had made their noise, but it hadn't reached the people who truly mattered to me. The engagement party had been a resounding success, and the people who loved us weren't swayed by my family's petty attempts to stir the pot. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end of their interference. My parents had always been relentless when it came to asserting control, and I doubted they would give up so easily. But for now, I chose to focus on the positive. The engagement party had proven that I was capable of building a life free from their shadow, a life filled with love, support, and genuine connection. What I didn't know was that the real drama was still to come. My family wasn't done with me yet, and their next move would test just how far I was willing to go to protect my happiness. A week before the wedding, I was busy with last-minute arrangements. Between confirming seating charts, finalizing floral details, and managing my nerves, I barely had time to think about my family. I was determined to keep the focus on Noah and me, not the lingering specter of my parents' toxic behavior. So, when I heard a knock at my door one evening, the last person I expected to see was my mom. She stood there, holding a box of cookies and wearing an expression I hadn't seen since I was a child, something close to contrition. Her eyes were red, her hair slightly disheveled, as though she had been crying before she even got to my apartment. I hesitated for a moment, debating whether to slam the door or hear her out. Against my better judgment, I let her in. The second the door closed behind her, she burst into tears. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed, clutching the box like it was some sort of peace offering. "I've been a terrible mother. I didn't realize how much I hurt you until now." Her words caught me off guard. My mom, the same woman who had spent years belittling me, was now standing in my living room, apologizing. She sat on the edge of my couch, dabbing her eyes with a tissue, and launched into what sounded like a rehearsed speech. She claimed that all the cruel comments, the comparisons to Emma, and the undermining were just jokes that she never thought would stick. "We didn't mean to hurt you," she said, her voice trembling. "We were trying to push you to be better, to motivate you." I stared at her, unsure whether to laugh or scream. "Motivate me?" I echoed, incredulous. "By tearing me down at every opportunity? By treating me like I was never good enough?" Her tears intensified. "I see it now. I do. And I want to make things right," she pleaded. Emma does, too, but she's too embarrassed to come to you herself. She told me she feels terrible about how things turned out. For a split second, I wanted to believe her. Despite everything, there was still a part of me that longed for a connection with my family, a part that craved the validation I had spent my entire life chasing. But something about her timing felt off.
Why now?
Why wait until the week of my wedding to suddenly have this epiphany? She must have sensed my hesitation because she doubled down, pulling out her phone and scrolling through photos of Emma and me as kids. Look at these, she said, holding up the screen. You two used to be so close. Don't you want to have that again? I clenched my fists, willing myself to stay calm. What I want, I said slowly, is for you to respect the boundaries I've set. This isn't about the past anymore.
It's about now.
And right now, I don't trust you. Her face fell, but she didn't argue. Instead, she stood up, placed the cookies on the counter, and left without another word. As the door clicked shut behind her, I felt an overwhelming mix of emotions, anger, sadness, and a nagging suspicion that there was more to this visit than met the eye. That suspicion was confirmed later that night when Aunt Jane called me. I need to tell you something, she said, her voice low and urgent. I just got off the phone with Margaret. She said Emma's been bragging to one of the cousins about crashing your wedding. My stomach dropped.
What?
Apparently, Jane continued, your mom and dad are in on it, too. They think if they show up uninvited and cause a scene, you'll be forced to let them back into your life. Emma even joked about giving a speech at the reception to remind everyone what a tight-knit family you all are. My hands were shaking as I gripped the phone. They wouldn't, I said, though deep down I knew they absolutely would. This was classic behavior, manipulation, theatrics, and an utter disregard for my feelings. It wasn't enough for them to smear me online or twist the narrative. They wanted to hijack the most important day of my life. Don't trust them, Jane warned. They're only here for themselves. I thanked her and hung up, my mind racing. This wasn't just a matter of excluding them from the guest list anymore. If they were willing to crash my wedding, I needed to be prepared. The next morning, I called Noah and explained everything. He listened quietly, his jaw tightening as I recounted Jane's warning. We'll handle it, he said firmly. I'll make sure they don't get anywhere near the venue. True to his word, Noah immediately reached out to his security team. They added my parents and Emma to a no-entry list and stationed guards at every entrance to the venue. He even hired an additional team to monitor the surrounding area, just in case they tried to pull something unexpected. I don't want you worrying about this, Noah told me later that night as we sat on the couch. This is our day. Let me take care of the rest. His calm confidence was exactly what I needed. For the first time since my mom's surprise visit, I felt a sense of relief. They could try whatever stunts they wanted, it wouldn't work. I wasn't that scared, insecure girl anymore. I was done being their pawn. As the week went on, my family's behavior grew more erratic. My mom sent a barrage of texts, alternating between guilt trips and passive-aggressive remarks. It's not too late to make things right, one message read. You'll regret shutting us out. Emma, meanwhile, was radio silent, which only made me more suspicious. My dad left a voicemail, his tone cold and businesslike. You're making a mistake. Family is forever, whether you like it or not. I ignored all of it. Aunt Jane, ever the voice of reason, called to check on me the night before the wedding. You've got this, she said, her voice full of warmth. No matter what they try, they can't ruin this day for you. Just focus on Noah and the love you've built together. I smiled, tears welling in my eyes. Thank you, Jane, for everything. She laughed softly. You don't have to thank me, sweetheart. I'm just so proud of you. As I hung up the phone, I felt a surge of resolve. Tomorrow was my wedding day, the beginning of a new chapter, free from the weight of my family's toxicity. They could scheme and plot all they wanted, but this time, I was ready. This time, I was taking back my power. The morning of my wedding was a mix of excitement and dread. On one hand, I was about to marry Noah, the love of my life and the man who had stood by me through every storm. On the other hand, there was the looming specter of my family's inevitable antics. Despite all the precautions Noah and his security team had taken, a part of me couldn't shake the fear that my parents and Emma would find a way to crash the event. I spent the morning getting ready in a sunlit bridal suite surrounded by people who genuinely cared about me. My best friend, Lisa, flitted around the room, making sure everything was perfect, while Aunt Jane sipped champagne and kept me grounded with her easy laughter. You're stunning, sweetheart, she said, her voice warm as she adjusted the delicate lace on my gown. And don't let anything or anyone ruin this day for you. Her words were a lifeline. I clung to them as the minutes ticked by, my nerves threatening to unravel. Every time I heard a door open or the hum of voices outside, I braced myself for bad news. But nothing came. Noah's team was doing their job, and the sanctuary of the bridal suite remained untouched by drama. As the ceremony drew closer, Lisa brought in a final update. Everything's under control, she said with a reassuring smile. Noah's team said there was a situation outside, but it's been handled. Your parents and Emma aren't getting anywhere near this wedding. A situation? I asked, my stomach tightening.
She hesitated, then sighed.
Apparently, your mom and dad tried to sweet-talk their way past security, and when that didn't work, Emma threw a fit. They started yelling about being family and demanding to be let in. My heart sank, even as relief flooded in. Of course, they'd try to make a scene. And the guests? I asked. Did anyone notice? Lisa shook her head. No one inside knows a thing. It's all contained. She leaned in and squeezed my hand. This is your day. Forget about them. Her words echoed Jane's, and for the first time all morning, I felt a flicker of calm. They could scream and demand all they wanted, but they weren't going to ruin this for me. I wouldn't let them. When the ceremony began, all the nerves I'd been carrying melted away. Standing at the end of the aisle, with sunlight streaming through the arched windows and soft music playing, was Noah. He looked at me with a mix of love and awe that made my breath catch. For the first time in my life, I felt truly seen, not as a shadow, not as an afterthought, but as someone who mattered. Jane walked me down the aisle, her arm steadying me as we moved forward. You're radiant, she whispered, giving my hand a squeeze. This is your moment. As I looked around the room, I was struck by the warmth and love radiating from the faces of our guests. These were people who had stood by me, supported me, and celebrated me for who I was. My parents and Emma were nowhere in sight, and their absence wasn't the black hole I'd feared it might be. If anything, the room felt lighter without them. When I reached Noah, he took my hands, his eyes never leaving mine. In that moment, the years of pain and insecurity faded into the background. Standing there with him, surrounded by people who truly cared, I realized something profound. I didn't need my family's approval. I didn't need their validation. I was enough, and I was finally free. The ceremony was beautiful, intimate, and exactly what I dreamed of. As Noah and I exchanged vows, I felt a deep sense of peace settle over me. This was my fresh start, a new chapter untainted by the shadows of my past. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, the room erupted into cheers and applause. Noah kissed me, and for the first time in years, I felt weightless. The reception that followed was a blur of laughter, dancing, and heartfelt toasts. Jane gave another speech, this time a more personal one that left me in tears. To watch her grow into the incredible woman she is today has been a privilege, she said, raising her glass. She's taught us all what it means to overcome, to thrive, and to love. And now, she's found someone who sees her for the extraordinary person she is. Here's to a lifetime of happiness. By the end of the night, I was exhausted but euphoric. As Noah and I shared a quiet moment on the balcony, overlooking the city lights, he wrapped his arms around me and whispered, "We did it. They didn't win." I leaned into him, my heart full. No, they didn't. And they never will. For the first time in my life, I felt free from their judgment, their control, and the toxic cycle I'd been trapped in for so long. This was the beginning of a new chapter, and I couldn't wait to see what came next. If I thought my family would slink away quietly after being shut out of the wedding, I was sorely mistaken. Within days of the ceremony, my mom launched a full-blown smear campaign on social media. Her posts were a masterclass in manipulative self-pity, designed to make me look like the villain and her the heartbroken mother abandoned by an ungrateful daughter. One post, in particular, caught my attention before I decided to block her entirely. It was a long, rambling rant accompanied by a carefully curated photo of Emma and me as kids, smiling in matching dresses. The caption read, "It's heartbreaking when your child forgets where they come from, all because they're chasing money. Family is everything, and we'll always love her, even if she's too busy for us. Emma, as always, is the real star, and we're so proud of her for handling this with grace." The comment section was a mix of sympathy and outrage. "You're such a strong mom," one relative wrote. "She'll come around eventually." Another added, "It's sad when people let success change them. Stay strong." My mom's friends, who barely knew me, chimed in with their 2 cents about how disappointing I must be. Emma, ever the enabler, liked several comments and added her own passive-aggressive take. "It's sad, but some people let their insecurities define them. I'm just focusing on the positives." At first, I was furious. The sheer audacity of my mom twisting the narrative into something that painted her as a victim and me as a selfish, money-hungry daughter made my blood boil. Then came the texts and calls from extended family members, most of whom hadn't been part of my life for years. "What's going on between you and your parents?" one aunt demanded, as if it were her business. A cousin messaged me to say, "You should make things right before it's too late. Family is forever." But Aunt Jane, true to form, swooped in like the guardian angel she's always been. She saw the posts and immediately went to work, sharing the truth with anyone who reached out to her. When an old family friend called her, concerned, Jane didn't hold back. "Do you know what she's put that girl through?" she said bluntly. "Years of ridicule, manipulation, and emotional abuse. If you think she's wrong for setting boundaries, then maybe you're part of the problem." Jane's fierce defense of me was both comforting and validating. She didn't sugarcoat the truth or shy away from calling out bad behavior. Slowly but surely, the noise started to die down. My mom's posts stopped gaining traction, and Emma's subtle jabs faded into the void of social media. I blocked my parents and Emma on every platform, cutting off their access to my life entirely. Through it all, Noah was my rock. Every time I felt a pang of guilt or doubt, he reminded me of why I'd made the decisions I had. "You owe them nothing," he said one evening as we sat on the couch, my head resting on his shoulder. "They had years to treat you with respect, and they chose not to. Setting boundaries doesn't make you a bad person, it makes you strong." His unwavering support gave me the strength to move forward. We focused on our new life together, throwing ourselves into building a future that felt light years away from the toxicity of my past. We made plans for a honeymoon, started looking at homes, and dreamed about what our life would look like in 5, 10, 20 years. Still, there were moments when the echoes of my family's manipulation crept back in. Late at night, when the house was quiet, I'd hear my mom's voice in my head, accusing me of being ungrateful. I'd remember the times she and my dad humiliated me in front of others, or the way Emma always seemed to revel in my misery. But then I'd think about Jane, about Noah, and about the friends who had shown up for me when it mattered most. They were my real family, the people who loved and supported me unconditionally. As the weeks passed, the fallout from my family's campaign became less of a storm and more of a distant rumble. My parents and Emma had lost their audience, and with no one left to play to, their efforts fizzled out. The relatives who had initially scolded me slowly faded into the background, too, as they realized I wasn't going to engage. One night, as Noah and I were making dinner together, he turned to me and said, "I'm proud of you, you know." I looked at him, surprised. "For what?" "For not letting them control you anymore," he said simply. "For standing up for yourself. It's not easy, but you did it." His words stayed with me long after the dishes were done and the lights were out. For so long, I'd measured my worth by the approval of people who never truly cared about me. But now, for the first time, I felt free to define myself on my own terms. The fallout wasn't just about cutting ties with my family, it was about reclaiming my life. And for that, I would always be grateful. A year after the wedding, Noah and I had settled into a comfortable rhythm. We'd bought a cozy house in a quiet neighborhood, complete with a big backyard and plenty of space for the life we were building together. Work was fulfilling. Our weekends were spent hosting friends or exploring new places, and for the first time in my life, I felt at peace. But nothing could have prepared me for the moment I saw the faint positive line on the pregnancy test. I stood in the bathroom, staring at it for what felt like an eternity. A mix of emotions flooded through me: excitement, fear, and an unexpected wave of grief. I was thrilled to be starting a family with Noah, but the news also dredged up old wounds. My mind immediately went to my parents, to the family I had left behind. Would they change if they knew about the baby? Would this be the thing that finally made them see me as more than an afterthought? By the time I told Noah, the excitement had taken over. He was over the moon, scooping me up in his arms and spinning me around the kitchen. "We're having a baby," he said, grinning from ear to ear. "Can you believe it?" I couldn't. But as the days passed, the reality began to sink in. I was going to be a mother, and with that came a heavy responsibility. I thought back to my own childhood, the constant comparisons, the cruel remarks, the feeling of never being enough. I swore to myself that my child would never know that kind of pain. As we shared the news with close friends and Aunt Jane, the circle of love and support around us grew tighter. Jane was ecstatic, already making plans to knit baby blankets and pass down the family heirloom she'd saved for years. "This baby's going to be so loved," she said, wiping away tears of joy. "And you're going to be an amazing mother. I just know it." Her confidence in me was reassuring, but it didn't completely silence the doubts creeping into my mind. Part of me still felt the ache of my parents' absence, even though I knew keeping them at a distance was the right choice. I couldn't help but wonder, would I ever be able to mend things with them? Could they change for the sake of their grandchild? I didn't have to wonder for long. News of the pregnancy spread quickly through the family grapevine, and it wasn't long before my parents found out. The first text came from my mom, a jarring shift from months of silence. "Congratulations on the baby. So excited for you. Let's talk soon." Then came my dad's message, shorter but equally loaded. "We need to be part of this. Family is important. Let's meet." Emma, of course, had to weigh in too. Her text was laced with her usual condescension, "So you're going to be a mom.
Wow.
Guess we'll see if you can handle it. Let me know if you need advice. Been there, done that with all my godchildren." Their attempts at re-entry into my life were predictable, but that didn't make them any less unsettling. My mom followed up her text with multiple phone calls, leaving voicemails that alternated between saccharine and guilt-inducing. "This baby deserves a real family," she said in one. "You can't shut us out forever." My dad's approach was more transactional. He sent a long email listing all the ways he and my mom could help, from babysitting to covering daycare costs. "Let's put the past behind us," he wrote. "We're grandparents now. That changes everything." But it didn't change anything for me. Their sudden interest wasn't about love or reconciliation, it was about control. They saw the baby as a way back into my life, a new pawn in their endless game. I knew if I let them in, history would repeat itself. My child would grow up subjected to the same toxic dynamics, and I couldn't let that happen. Aunt Jane was my sounding board through it all. "They're not going to change," she reminded me gently when I shared my doubts. "They're saying all the right things now because they see an opportunity. But the moment they're back in your life, it'll be the same old story. Don't let them use your child as leverage." Her words solidified my resolve. I didn't respond to my parents' messages, didn't return their calls. Instead, I focused on the people who had shown me what real family looked like, people like Jane who had stood by me through every storm, and Noah, who was as excited about this baby as I was. As the months went by, my parents' attempts grew more desperate. My mom sent packages to our house, baby clothes, books, and even a handwritten letter begging for forgiveness. "We made mistakes," she wrote. "But we love you, and we want to be there for our grandchild." I didn't open the other letters she sent after that. By then, I had made my decision. My child deserved better than to be caught in their web of manipulation and control. It wasn't just about protecting myself anymore, it was about creating a safe, loving environment for the new life I was bringing into the world. When Noah and I found out we were having a girl, it felt like a full-circle moment. I thought about the little girl I used to be, desperate for her parents' love and approval, and I promised myself that my daughter would never have to fight for those things. She would know she was enough, just as she was. With Jane by my side and Noah as my partner, I felt ready to begin this new chapter. I couldn't change the past, but I could shape the future, for me, for my daughter, and for the family I had chosen to build. My parents might have lost their chance, but I wasn't going to lose mine. This was my new beginning, and it was going to be beautiful. The first time I held my newborn son in my arms, the world shifted. His tiny fingers wrapped around mine, and I felt an overwhelming wave of love and clarity. In that moment, every doubt I'd ever had about my choices faded away. This was my family, this little boy, the life Noah and I had built together, and the people who had shown me what love truly looked like. I didn't need anything else. Naming him was easy. We chose Elliot, a name that felt strong and timeless, one that carried no ties to the past I'd left behind. When Jane came to visit the day after we brought him home, her face lit up the moment she saw him. "Oh, he's perfect," she said, her voice trembling with emotion as she gently held her grandnephew for the first time. "You've come so far, sweetheart. You've built something beautiful." Her words stayed with me as I adjusted to the rhythm of motherhood. There were sleepless nights, moments of self-doubt, and a steep learning curve, but I faced it all with the confidence that this time, I wasn't alone. Noah was my partner in every sense of the word, taking midnight feedings, soothing Elliot when he cried, and constantly reminding me that I was doing a good job. And Jane, as always, was my anchor. She visited often, bringing meals, advice, and endless love for the baby she already adored. I didn't hear much from my parents after I gave birth, though I'm sure they knew about Elliot. News tends to travel quickly in families, even fractured ones. My mom sent a few more letters, filled with the same tired pleas and thinly veiled guilt trips. "We just want to be part of his life," she wrote in one. "Don't you think he deserves to know his grandparents?"
I didn't reply.
The decision to keep them out of Elliot's life wasn't an easy one, but it was the right one. I knew their presence would bring more harm than good, and I refused to let my son grow up in the same toxic environment I had escaped. My parents and Emma might never change, but that wasn't my burden to carry anymore. Their choices were theirs, and I had made mine. Looking back, I can see how every painful moment in my past led me here. The years of feeling invisible, the endless comparisons, the ridicule, it all taught me to recognize what love isn't. It's not conditional or controlling. It doesn't come with strings attached. Love is what I see in Noah's eyes when he looks at Elliot. It's the way Jane has stood by me, unwavering, through every chapter of my life. It's the way I feel every time I hold my son and promise him he'll always be enough. As I watch Elliot grow, I find myself reflecting more on what family really means. For so long, I thought it was about blood ties and shared history. But now I know the truth. Family is about love, respect, and showing up for one another. It's about the people who stand by you, not the ones who tear you down. Some days, I wonder if my parents ever truly regret what they did. Do they look at old photos of Emma and me and wish they'd done things differently? Or are they still convinced they were right, that their tough love was justified? I'll probably never know, and that's okay. It's not my responsibility to heal them or fix the damage they caused. My focus is on the family I've created, the one I chose. Jane comes over often, doting on Elliot and filling our home with her warmth. She tells him stories about his strong, brilliant mama and teases Noah about how Elliot already has his eyes. Watching her with my son is a reminder of how much love can heal. She's been my rock through everything, and now she's a part of the next generation of my family, a family defined not by blood, but by kindness and connection. Noah and I often talk about the future, about the kind of life we want for Elliot. We dream of a home filled with laughter, honesty, and unconditional love. We want him to grow up knowing his worth, never questioning whether he's enough. And as I look around at the life we've built, I know we're on the right path. Sometimes, when the house is quiet and Elliot is asleep in my arms, I think about the journey that brought me here. The pain, the heartache, the years of feeling small, they all led to this moment. And for that, I'm strangely grateful. Those experiences taught me my worth and gave me the strength to demand better for myself. They showed me that sometimes you have to let go of the people who hurt you to make room for the ones who truly deserve a place in your life. As I rock Elliot to sleep, I whisper a promise to him. You'll always be loved for exactly who you are. And in that moment, I realize it's a promise I'm finally able to keep for myself, too.